Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Charlotte Mason Show. I am your very allergy-infected host, Julie Ross. And so, pardon my stuffiness today. And I'm here with Shay Kemp. Woo!
Hello.
In the house with the fun leopard earrings.
Yes.
For those who can see this on video, Shay looks all cute with her cute little leopard earrings, and I have my glasses on and I'm all stuffed up. But it's okay. It's all good. So this, Shay, I don't know if you realize this, is our last episode of season 5.
Already?
I know. It just went poof,
Wow, that's
fast.
fast.
I know.
Yes.
And that is
I'd not.
because next month we are taking a little break because Shay and I are going on the road. Woo!
Yay.
On the road again. I just can't wait to get
And we're
on
good.
the road again.
Fun booth at the conventions.
Yes. So we will be at the Great Homeschool Convention in Greenville, March 17th that weekend, and then the next weekend in Missouri. So if you're close to any of those and want to come hang out with us and have fun, we would love to meet you and get to see you. And I mean, I just have to say, I think Shay and I are probably going to have the funnest booth in the house. What do you think, Shay?
I agree. There's no way anybody could be enjoying themselves more than you and I. I'm just saying.
Yeah, we have a good time no matter what. So, so that's what we'll be doing in March, and then in April I'll be going by myself to Ohio. So yeah, we're going to take a little break here, and then we'll resume our regularly scheduled programs after that. And then nobody will play some of our most popular episodes. So in case you missed some of those in the past. But today we are doing part 2 of chapter 3 in A Philosophy of Education for our book club. If you're following along, you'll have a little bit of time to catch up. So that's always interesting. And we split this chapter on principle 2, the good and evil nature of children, into 2 parts because it was getting a little long. Last time, plus it was at night, and I don't really function at nighttime, so my brain was starting to shut off. So.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
We have to make sure we make sense, right? So yeah.
Right. I stopped functioning after dinner, so you get what you get when you listen to a podcast we record at night. But it is in the afternoon, so hopefully we are ready to go here. But there is so much, even in these last 2 sections, like so much to talk about, and so I think it's really good that we did split it up. As I was going through it today, I was like, oh wow, there's so much here. So this. Oh well, before we go into the new part, Shay, do you want to just kind of recap what we talked about last time, in case it's been a while since people have listened to that?
Sure. So this chapter is really,
Shay, please.
Oh yes, okay,
no pressure or anything.
No, none whatsoever. Well, it's all about what I take away from it, right?
Exactly, that's it.
The definition.
You could get up and do a little interpretive dance for your narration if you want.
Yes. Oh, you guys would love to see that. Yes, I'm sure. I would not scar anybody. So this chapter is super rich as it talks about really who a child is all the way around. So she discusses the first section, the well-being of the body, and that's really interesting because she talks about how often that is the only thing that education focuses on is just the activities, quote unquote, and what that looks like to address it in a Charlotte Mason education. Then she talks about the well-being of our mind and how we address that. And my favorite phrase from that section is not to drown our teachings in verbiage. Love that phrase. The third section she discusses, and that one's really long, is the intellectual appetite. Yes. And this talks about divine curiosity and how we use that as something that sort of propels our schools. We use that forward motion children already have to be curious, and how we use that to propel our daily school day. And then the fourth section that we'll talk about today is misdirected affections, which that says a lot to me just in that very first phrase there, doesn't it, in the title?
Yes, I think that the title is very profound. Because the basic premise of Principle 2 is that children are born with capacity for good or for evil, right? We have our sin nature. We all can go towards evil very easily, right? But we also have a possibility for good. And how do we encourage the good and discourage the bad? And so that's kind of what she's talking about here in directing our children's affections. So it's not, if you follow this formula, your child will turn out good and that evil will be
Yes.
gone. And um, we're directing affections, right? Again, there's certain principles and things that she's going to outline here that we can follow in raising our children. But at the end of the day, they still have their free will and that propensity towards evil. And I think, um, in the homeschool world, it can be very easy to, okay, well, I just listen to these people and I do exactly what they tell me. And if I follow all these steps, then my children are going to
Yeah.
turn out to be perfect,
Hmm.
saints. And we and I, we have older children, right? And I talk to homeschool families with older children, and these moms are just devastated when their kids are making choices that they don't agree with, right?
Yeah.
And that they're going
Mhm.
against maybe what their family values are or whatnot. And it is devastating, right? Because we care so much about our children. Of course, we would be devastated by that. Um, but it rocks their whole identity of, I put all my eggs into this homeschooling basket thinking if I homeschool them, we'll never run into any problems. My child will never be
Right.
tempted by whatever, whatever. And I'm like, whoa, we still live in the world here.
Just not realistic to think that there's a formula that you put in A plus B, homeschooling plus this particular curriculum or whatever equals, these great.
Yes.
I mean, I have great kids, but I don't have perfect kids, and they've made decisions I don't love. I'm like, not that's not the choice I would have made. Um, but I'm so grateful that she addresses these things in this, because sometimes we do have families that say, okay, well, I tried, Charlotte Mason, or I tried this, I tried that, and it just didn't work for us because they have a certain outcome in mind.
Right.
And I think we cannot go into, especially not, Charlotte Mason says not to do that, but we can't have these particular outcomes, expectations, outcomes at the end of whatever it is we're following, because we have free will. These children have their own free will, which is what she talks about here, this moral nature.
Yeah.
We need to concern ourselves with that. She tells us this rich endowment of the moral nature is a matter which the educator should concern himself. We do need to be concerned with that,
Yes.
but we need to be realistic about what it is actually we're dealing with that moral nature.
Mm.
We're not giving them, she says, children are not to be fed morally like young pigeons with pre-digested food.
Yes.
And so the little moral lesson is not what we're talking about offering
Right.
to our children.
And I want to keep on that for a little bit because I think that is hugely important because we think, okay, well, it's my job to help direct their affections. Again, that's what I'm responsible for. And to me, that was super
Mm-hmm.
freeing, even, because yes, my kids are going to make their own choices. And if I take the burden on of that was, oh, well, they did that, that's my fault. No, 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 no. They made their
Yes.
own choice. That's their
Right.
fault, right? It's,
Right.
was I faithful? Am I always faithful? No, 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 no. Right? But am I trying to be and trying to walk in faithfulness of helping to direct their affections? Yes, that's my job. And I can rest in that and kind of leave the results. And who knows what those choices in what path they might choose or how God might redeem them. And I'm working on adding some stuff to the Cycle 2 Morning Time packet, and I'm writing about different hymn authors. And four of them in that packet that I wrote about yesterday, all four of them, their story was they had gone off the deep end. They were living completely
Mm-hmm.
horrible um, lives. John Newton and the slave trade and Charles Wesley went off. I mean, it's just, and then God came and rescued them through that. And then they had these amazing, beautiful hymns and songs to teach people because of that story. We don't know what our kids' stories are going to be, but we just have to do our part, which is what she's talking about here. And so I think that's super important. But then we get that pressure. Okay, I have to have character training. I have to train my children in morality. This is my job. And if I don't do it right, they're going to choose some horrible thing. And so,
Right.
well, what's the easiest way to get them to kind of toe the line is teach them very much character training, like with stickers, and children can outwardly behave for a time period, right? But their inward motivation, their inward character hasn't been shaped at all. And so that's kind of what I feel like Charlotte Mason is talking about here is there's no sustenance to anything that they're teaching here. There's these cute little moral stories, and those are very popular back in Victorian England. If you look at the books that children had to read back then,
Yeah.
I mean, they're all these little goody stories, right? And if we make this so appealing, and you can have this perfect, wonderful life if you just follow all the rules, children, that children would want to. That didn't actually led them
Yeah.
to not follow them.
Right. Exactly. And that's why I think so the question is, so what do we do?
Yeah.
And she tells us here, this is why we need poetry, history, romance, geography, travel, biography, science, and sums. We're finding beauty in all these things, not, and she says, no one can tell what particular morsel a child will select for his sustenance. Once again, she goes back to this example of food and taking in a feast. And, we put this stuff out there, and we've said before in this podcast, and I'll say again, it's so easy for us to leave out. We want to leave out the beauty things. We leave out the poetry. We leave out the hymn study. We leave out some of these things because, we don't have time. But what happens is in those deep stories of beauty, we end up with the real meat that children can actually chew on instead of just a little moral story that we all know. Okay, yes, Jimmy should not have lied. I mean, get that. That's simplistic.
Yes.
But when it's something that's actually meaty and deeper, then she even says here, she says, we older persons are amazed at the lavish display of any one of these to which the most ignorant child may treat us. And she listed above that kindness, benevolence, generosity, gratitude, pity, sympathy, loyalty, humility, gladness. We all want that for an outcome. All of us do for our children. But how do we do that? How do we get that from them? We have to give them these beautiful, deep things to chew on, these meaty things to chew on.
Yeah. What you said reminded me of the quote at the end of that section where she said, "These are the children to whom we have been doling out the 3 R's for generations. Small wonder that juvenile crime," I mean, I feel like she's writing today, right? "Small wonder that juvenile crime increases. The intellectually starved boy must needs find food for his imagination, scope for his intellectual power, and crime, like the cinema, offers, it must be admitted, brave adventures." So, we have, like we talked about in the last episode, right? Children are born with this insatiable curiosity for knowledge, right? They want to feed those good things. They're seeking it, right? And if they can't find it in their studies, because like you're saying here, we're giving them the 3 R's here, we're giving them the basics, they're going to turn out great, right? They're going to go find the scope for their imagination somewhere else. Crime, talking about movies, we could list a whole bunch more things nowadays, Charlotte, that will capture
right?
their imaginations if their imaginations haven't been captured by beautiful things.
No. And, understanding this, I think, is what helps us stay the course. When we, it's so much easier to find the book that says, okay, character training, read these little simplistic things, fill out the worksheet, okay, your kid understands what it means to be, honest or whatever. But those sorts of things just don't, she says in here, even these children, she talks about at the bottom of 62, about the hunger that they have. They're so hungry. It says, they may turn out to be incentives to learning, just as the more hungry the child, the readier he is for dinner. Our children are hungry for those meaty things. They want that. And so if we just keep feeding them these little snacks, these little moral stories, okay, well, here's a candy bar, and a little later on, here's maybe a little granola bar, and then here's this. They don't have the chance to get that real hunger, and we're not feeding that hunger. And we got to use that hunger in our homeschools. We got to use that. We got to use that to push us forward, to propel us. Okay, they're curious. Let's use that curiosity to move them forward. We use that even I just talked to a lady yesterday. She was talking about how she got frustrated with the short lessons because you read it, timer goes off, we stop.
Yeah.
No, use that hunger.
Yeah, that's
Use
good. Yeah, right. It's very
and the
simple.
next day, yeah, we can say, okay, remember how hungry you were for the end of that story, that cliffhanger, whatever? We got to use that hunger and morally as well.
Yeah.
So it's actually doing something.
Yeah, I like that quote. She was talking there about children who are born kind of in impoverished situations are even hungrier,
Hmm.
for these
Yes.
ideas and this moral teaching, right? And I think it's interesting. I think you saw the study, and we can go on a little tangent soapbox here for a second, but that uh, it was studying pre-K programs in Tennessee, and it was for the
Yes.
most impoverished children in Tennessee. And okay, well, they're not doing well in school, so we're going to solve that problem by having them go to full day 4K, and we're going to focus on the basics, and this will get them
Hmm.
ready and they'll have an advantage going into kindergarten. And both you and I were kindergarten teachers, and so I thought it was all fascinating. But the reality of it was those children actually did worse off than their peers who went to play based preschool programs or didn't even go to preschool at all and were just at home. By third grade, that curve went sharply down, and those kids had more
Hmm.
instances of misbehaving in school, um, of not, you lose that motivation, right? And so I think that's kind of what she's
Yes.
saying. Like our most impoverished children have even more of a hunger, just like a kid who hasn't been fed has
Yes.
more of a hunger, and they need more of these ideas, not less of them, just to focus on
Hmm.
those three R's.
Right.
I
And
I
that's
think
just
you
what
shared
we
that on
do.
Facebook, right? We should link to that in the show notes.
Yes, I just wrote that down. So we'll make sure we put that study in the show notes because it's powerful information for anybody that wants to say, okay, does this really work to put in these rich things? And she says here, there is nothing in all those spiritual stores in the world's treasury too good for the education of all children.
Yeah.
Every lovely tale, illuminating poem, instructive history, every unfolding of travel and revelation of science exists for children. And so, what I find is interesting is that even with my children, there's things that I'm reading about, I'm studying about, I'm interested in. And it doesn't matter if it's on their level. If it's rich, they find themselves interested in it. If I can just share, oh, I just read this book
Mhm.
and it's so interesting. They're interested in it. It doesn't have to be on fifth grade level. It doesn't have to be on 10th grade level. It's if it's rich, then they can take something from it.
Mhm.
And so it's a beautiful thing when we recognize that if it is worth reading, it's worth reading to anybody. And she gives an example, I think later on in the chapter about narration and how
Oh yeah, I think
these, yes, with the third,
where was that? Well, my
I
page
think it's
numbers are
the next,
15
and
years,
it,
but I wrote narration really big right next to it.
did you?
Yeah.
Yes, I did too.
Do you want to read
Yeah,
that part?
yeah. Which part do you mean on the page 65?
This is
The
talking about
example of how knowledge
narration.
grows. Yes, where it says, I heard a class of girls age 13, that section.
Oh, see, my page numbers are all different than yours, but sure, you can read that.
Yeah. Okay. It says, here's an example of how such knowledge grows. I heard a class of girls aged about 13 read an essay on George Herbert. So when I read this, I looked up an essay of George Herbert, and it's not something that we would normally, um, we're not normally going to pick this up, right? Okay. For like 3 or 4 of his poems were included, and none of the girls had read either essay or poems before. They narrated what they had read, and in the course of their narration, gave a full paraphrase of the elixir, the pulley, and 1 or 2 other poems. No point made by the poet was omitted, and his exact words were used pretty freely. The teacher made comments upon 1 or 2 unusual words, and that was all. To explain or enforce, otherwise than by a reverently sympathetic manner, the glance and words that showed that she too cared would have been impertinent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is just so powerful. And if I can just read one more, I want to I'm going to skip over a little bit and said, I felt humbled before the children knowing myself incapable of such immediate and rapid apprehension of several pages of new matter, including poems whose intention is by no means obvious. In such ways, the great thoughts of great thinkers illuminate children, and they grow in knowledge, chiefly the knowledge of God.
Mm-hmm.
That is so powerful. Just that section. I think about these girls and she's watching them thinking, it's going to be too hard. I mean, I've done this
Yes.
myself. I'm like, this is too, this book is too hard. I shouldn't have picked this book.
Mm.
That girl that wrote A Gentle Feast, should I? She shouldn't
What
have.
was she thinking assigning them
She should,
Churchill?
why was she thinking she should have this for this form? This is too much. And then I'm blown away, and I feel like Charlotte, I'm humbled
Yeah.
before my
Can you
children.
imagine Charlotte
Knowing,
saying that? I mean, that woman was brilliant. And she's saying, I don't think I could have done that. What? Charlotte?
I know, right? Yeah. Yeah. That's so powerful. And I know this is in a different section. I mean,
Oh,
we
no,
kind of
that's
skipped into
fine.
yeah, but it's just so powerful to think about and how I imagine myself if I was this 13-year-old girl and maybe I had been used to getting marks on a test and not doing well
Mhm.
because, oh, I didn't remember who wrote the poem or what year they lived on. But
What's the
I'm
rhyme
standing in
scheme in
front of this.
Herbert's poem? Yeah.
What, can you mark the literary devices and where's the metaphor? But then I'm standing before this woman. I think, imagine how they
Oh yeah,
felt.
I'd be intimidated by Charlotte.
Right. But then they were able to give this and for her to look at them and say, wow, your mind is really beautiful and rich. And wow, how would that build up that 13-year-old's, feeling, wow, I'm really proud of myself. Look what I'm capable of doing. And that's how I want my children to feel when they walk away from
And I
school.
feel like
I
that's
want,
what happens when they do have this kind of education, right? They have the
yes,
confidence that they can tackle meaty things, and they have the confidence that what they have to say about those meaty things is important because they've been saying it and we've been
yes,
listening to them for these years, you know?
yes,
And of course, I don't think these 13-year-old girls, when they were 6, started out narrating Herbert, right? They
right,
were
obvious,
Arabella Buckley's Eyes and No Eyes, you know? That's what they're and then, they're working their way up to these meaty things. So I think, parents can get real discouraged and go, oh, narration doesn't work with their 6-year-old because they're just saying like a few things and or they say I don't remember or they don't have a lot of detail or it can be discouraging without having kind of this
yes,
long view of they're going to get to this point. But it takes building
mm,
that
yes,
mental muscle to get there and that takes time.
yes, it does. And I love, she talks about how sometimes what I do wrong is what she says in the next
Yep.
part is, and this, the chief part of education is drowned in torrents of talk, in tedious repetition, in objurgation and recrimination, in every sort of way in which the mind may be bored and the affections deadened. And we do have to recognize that we can't expect this outcome of children who, in these later forms, are able to wrestle with this deep material and make connections and understand the purpose of the poet or the author if we are drowning it in torrents of talk. If we're doing, you have to sort of decide, I'm going to go all in. I'm actually going to use these principles and these methods. And, we do see parents that get frustrated with that. They're like, oh, well, I just substituted this out for a workbook. Then and I don't understand, why are their narrations not
Yeah.
rich? Why are they struggling? And well, Charlotte tells us, if we have tedious repetition and objurgation and recrimination and boredom, then and their affections are
Yes.
deadened.
I mean that was
And
I
so,
wrote next to my book, yikes. I mean,
yes,
there's misdirected affections and then there's just killing them altogether.
yes,
Killing them
right.
altogether is bad. Don't do that.
Right, please don't do that. And it's the same like if you put the same. I mean, my kids love oatmeal, but one summer we lived basically out in the woods all summer, and every day pretty much we had oatmeal for breakfast because it was filling, it was easy, super cheap, and I could make it on a basically had a Bunsen burner to cook on. Well, can I tell you that now my children absolutely almost refuse to eat oatmeal?
I don't blame them.
That tedious repetition killed, I deadened their affection for it. And we just want to be aware of that. I've done it. So, this is not judgmental call here. It does have
Well, I have to tell you
repercussions.
something funny. My daughter that's in college is studying neuroscience, and in her psych 400 class, they had to do this like I guess thinking test the other day, and so she sent me the results, and I couldn't really understand it. But her text was, "See, Mom, a gentle feast works," and I was like, "What is she talking about?" And so I just called her today before we got on here, and I'm like, "What? You have to explain the results to this test to me because I don't really understand it." But it was measuring your different kind of levels of thinking, like, and the first level
Mm,
is like shallow processing, and it was like matching like uppercase, lowercase, rhyming words, very recall kind of thinking. And then we went
right.
up to what we call semantic thinking, and being able to make connections and understanding language on a
Mm,
deeper level. And, she's like, my shallow processing score was super low, but man, did I kill it on that semantic processing. She's like, compared to like the global data score. I don't even understand statistics, whatever it was. She's
yeah.
like, my semantic thinking was like off the charts. And I was like, well, why do you think that is? She's like, well, it's like what you put together. Like you're making all these connections between all these different subjects, and you're learning about this thing in history, but then it kind of correlates to what you're learning about in art or music or
Yes.
poetry, and kind of understanding all these different things together. And and I said, well, what's the benefit then of having like a higher semantic processing versus like a shallow processing? And she says it's your ability to prioritize what information you're taking in, what you need to know and what you want to know.
Mm,
I was like, mic
so
drop.
powerful. So powerful. And we need to hear those stories because so many people listening and I as well. I mean, my youngest is fifth grade, but we need to hear those stories because this is a long haul sort of process that we're in. We're not going to have a 5-year old that's going to say, "Oh, can I give you a fabulous narration? Let me tell you how I can connect my letter tiles to the story you just read in home." It's just not going to get that, and we're like, "Where is this happening?" But it does. It really does happen, and so we need to hear that Charlotte actually was right.
Yes. And she says, closely there after that, um, education implies a continuing going forth of the mind, but whatever induces introspection or any form of self consciousness holds up, as it were, the intellectual powers and brings progress to a standstill. So I think this is an important part too, that they're narrating what they've read or what they've heard, so they have something to talk about. It's not, and this was really encouraged, when I was a public school teacher, just well, what do you think that meant? Or tell me a story. Like they would have to come up with things rather than seeing something and then talking about it, or
Yes,
reading a story and then narrating it. Like that gives the children context and information. They're not having to pull this out of like their own experience. They
and
don't have
imagine
those experiences yet.
they don't have it yet. Right? Exactly.
And
Hmm.
so narration is so powerful because it's built upon these great ideas, and they're taking them and they're making these connections, like my daughter was saying, and that helps with your memory, and that helps you make more connections later on. And the more connections you're making, I mean, all the neuroscience stuff that she's studying, it's like all the stuff Charlotte Mason was talking about, but now it's all we can see it, and
Yeah.
you're in
Yes.
your brains and things, which is really cool. Okay, so we kind of skipped ahead there.
You
Did you
did.
want to say anything else
You did. I
about
did that.
misdirected affection before we go on? The
Um.
affection she's talking about here, two big ones were love and justice. And
Mhm.
again, she talked about, we don't want to bore them with a lot of talk, with a lot of moral lessons. She says, the teacher points the moral with 1,000 tedious platitudes, directs, instructs, illustrates, and bores exceedingly the nimble and subtle minds of his scholars. So, we're not doing that. We're not doing a bunch of talk, giving them these little cute stories to try to drive home a morality. We're putting them in touch with these living ideas, these living books for all these different subjects, as we're building their sympathies towards what's good and beautiful. I think justice is super important. Do you want to talk about that for a little bit? I think we've talked about the love of beauty and whatnot, but we haven't like. about
Yes.
justice,
Yes.
which I
So
think
we,
in today's world
yeah,
is like we all need a
yes,
little bit more
yes,
justice, right?
right. Yes. And she says, everyone has justice in his heart, which you can tell because if you buy one kid a candy bar, another one says, "Hey, that's not fair." But what I love about this this section is once again, how do we take that the child is born
Mhm,
with and use
mhm.
it? How do we take that, just like the curiosity, just like the love of beauty? How do we take that and harness that? And so she says exactly what we're doing here. We're taking these, not just the stories, but the truth that is in what we're reading. And this is on page 61 in mine. It says, they should know that truth, that is justice in word, is their due, and that
Mhm.
of all other persons. Even that concept right there would be great if we could
Yeah.
teach, you know, half of the world that thought. There are few better equipments for a citizen than a mind capable of discerning the truth. And this just mind can be preserved only by those who take heed what they think. And that goes exactly with what you were saying with your daughter, was talking about. Let me take this knowledge and let me prioritize it.
Right.
What is truth here and what is not truth? And
Yeah, and I think
that's really,
I highlighted that same section you just read because our words are so powerful in teaching kids,
mm,
the power of how do we speak to other people? What is our duty? What is fair in terms of how we talk about other people and how we talk to other people, and what is um, do everyone as a human being? How do we show them kindness? I mean, that's just right there in today's world, and the misuse of
yes,
words is hugely powerful. And she says also, every person has many opinions, whether his own honestly thought out or notions picked up from his pet newspaper or his companions. And I just want to be like, and Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat, like,
yes. And all social media. Is that real? Is that true? I mean,
right, and teaching
and
them that you know, where do our thoughts come from? She says young people should leave school knowing that their thoughts are not their own. That you are building upon the ideas of other people, like what you get from the newspaper, what you get from your friends, what you get from social media. You know, you those can change your opinions, right? Or how else are you developing your opinions for yourself? And I think that's a big difference between um, being taught in a kind of a top-down model where the teacher's telling you what's important, the teacher is telling
yes,
you actually what to think a lot of the time, versus reading these things and thinking for yourself. And but even in homeschooling, I think even if the parent isn't doing a lot of talk, right? You might be reading a story and oh, well, we can't read that because that's a different view of than the thing that we want. We don't want you to have
yeah.
to think through that or talk about it. So we're just not going to read that at all or touch that or go over that. And I see that kind of tendency too, rather than, okay, here's this person's perspective. Here's this person's perspective. What do you think?
Well, and that's why I think these, like the lives of famous
Mm,
men,
yeah,
these where
those are
people
so
make
great. Yeah.
decisions, the biographies. They're so important because we watch somebody and we see what is the outcome of their
Mhm.
choice. Is it bad or is it good? We don't need to shy away
Right.
from that. And sometimes we'll have somebody say, "Well, I don't like to share this with my child because it was a bad outcome. It was a bad." But we need them to see these consequences, which she says here, in a way where we can help them understand the
Mhm.
outcomes rather than them just say, okay, all the world is beautiful and perfect, and then they can make these choices and there's not a good
Mhm. Mhm.
outcome. We need to prepare them for that. And we do this by these rich, beautiful stories of these people's lives, which don't always make great choices.
Right. Yeah. I think that is super important, and also, so biographies are super helpful with that. I mean, Charlotte Mason included Plutarch and Shakespeare into kind of her study of morality, and definitely in those see a lot of
And
bad. So,
we just started that too. We just started Plutarch. I've never attempted
woo, good
it,
Jay.
but I was really impressed with
I'm
you. I'm
impressed.
going to
I'm
tell you.
impressed just being in your presence, actually. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. I'm sure. But I was really
I'm
proud
very
of
proud of you.
myself because I'm like, okay. I listened to your podcast that you did about
With
Plutarch,
Rachel. Yeah, that was
and yes, it was wonderful. And so I said, okay, we're just going to jump in. We've only done a couple, and we're feeling our way here, you know. But yeah, so those kind of things. And I read this, I'm like, yes. And what's funny is I watched a TV show. I don't know if anybody ever watches. This is a British show about Father
oh
Brown
yeah, yeah.
mysteries. Have you ever anybody ever watched that? I love those. And they did one on
No way.
Plutarch, and they say yes. And there's a murder by Plutarch, and the lady says, there is every wisdom of the world is can be
That's
found in
true.
Plutarch. And that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about we want them to see these things now about justice and good decisions and poor decisions ahead of
Hmm.
time,
Oh
you know.
yes, for sure. And not to forget the importance of for younger children of fairy tales. And I think that can also be we can't go fairy tales, especially like Blue Fairy Book or some of the older ones. They're too violent, they're too scary, there's too much evil and darkness, and we need to have like the Disney cleaned up little version of the fairy tales. And
Mm,
um,
yeah.
you know, I understand that need, right? I remember reading them to my young son and going, "Oh my gosh, like they just boiled that dude in the
Mhm.
pot." Like, like there's a part of me.
Really? Or yeah,
But
yeah.
we're developing their imagination through these fairy tales, and they're seeing
Hmm.
that there's good and that there's evil in the world, and they can understand that in a context that makes sense to them. Like they're not going to understand Plutarch's Lives of Alexander the Great, like yet.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. And there's a level there, but that's why kids love like the Marvel movies or they want a hero.
I'm
They
holding out
understand.
for
She
a
says,
hero to the end of the night. Sorry, I can resist.
"Yes, we needed to hear that." Perfect. She even says in here something about how we all there recognize it. And I think when she talks about that everybody has a justice and the cry fair
Mhm.
play, like we have that in our heart. We want to see
Yes.
justice. We want to see somebody swoop in and save the day. We know there's darkness. Children recognize that. We're born with the propensity to understand that. She talks about in the beginning of the chapter. The title of the chapter is The Good and Evil Nature
Yeah.
of a Child. So when we want them to grasp that justice, we want them to get it. What better way than to put these things in front of them?
Yeah, it reminds
So
me of
she was so,
that Chesterton quote to actually print it out so I could read it because I feel very strongly about the importance of developing a child's imagination. And so did Charlotte. She talked about it as the habit of
yeah.
imagination. But Chesterton says fairy tales then are not responsible for producing in children fear or any of the shapes of fear. Fairy tales do not give children the idea of the evil or the ugly. That is in the child already
Yes.
because it is in the world already. Fairy tales do not give the child his first ideas of boogie. What fairy tales give the child is his first clear idea of the possible defeat of boogie. The baby has known the dragon intimately ever since he had an imagination. What the fairy tale provides for him is a St. George to kill the dragon. Exactly what the fairy tale does is this:
Mm.
it accustoms him for a series of clear pictures to the idea that these limitless terrors had a limit, and these shapeless enemies have enemies in the knights of God, and that there is something in the universe more mystical than darkness and stronger than strong fear.
Oh, I want to cheer. I want to cheer after listening to that. That is so powerful and so accurate. And what I've experienced with my own children, reading these stories and
Mhm.
watching them connect to them. I mean, it's just, yes,
And
I
Charlotte
love
Mason
it.
also talked about it. So this is what she wrote in a parents' review article. Let him learn life through the transfiguring medium of the fairy tale. But how is the fairy tale better than the tale of Tom and Harry, who each had a cake sent to school? Simply because in the fairy tale, all things are possible and strange things come to pass. What if these things are not true? The children know perfectly the difference between the kingdom of make believe and the arid realm of fact.
Hmm.
It's true, much is possible in a fairy tale. Sometimes it is through what we wish to be possible, we can then discover how to make it possible. Through fairy tales, we learn how to live and how not to live. We learn which truths are real and that these truths can exist in fairyland just as well as in reality. The truth of love, the truth of compassion, truth of friendship
Oh,
are just as deeply felt in the alternative fairy world as in our own. Just as these truths are good, truths of evil exist too. Children learn that there is also a truth of greed, revenge, deceit. These are harder truths to learn. So, by learning them in the fairy world first, they build up their emotional armor to better face them in reality. Mic drop. Thank you, Charlotte.
wow. Yeah. I mean, else needs to be said. It's so clear and so accurate and such a powerful concept to take a deep breath and say, I don't have to try to teach all this stuff. I can just find these great
Mhm.
stories. I don't have to try to be like responsible. I'm just going to put this in front of them and let God do his work in
Yes, and that is so
them.
key because I think there's different programs out there where it's like, okay, I want to teach my kid needs to be more honest. I've noticed that they're lying and they so I'm going to do we're going to read these books about honesty and these poems about honesty and you know the child is just like, wow, by the end of it, because you're force feeding it into them rather than, okay, we're going to read these beautiful fairy tales. We're
Yes.
going to read these beautiful stories and they're going to take what they need out of
Mm.
them. It might not be honesty, might be some other lesson that God wants them to learn from
Right.
that story right now. And, maybe someday the honest, keep working on that. But, that we don't
Yes.
have to try to figure out what book or what resource to use to solve this bad habit that we see. And it puts all the pressure on us and all the responsibility on us, it is
Yes.
not ours. Ours is, again, is to prepare the feast, to be faithful and trying to direct their affections towards what is true and good and beautiful. And that it's their job as the self-education, right, to take what they need, even in these morality things, just as much as it is in history. They're going to
Yes.
take what they need out of it. My son and I were just reading Where the Red Fern Grows yesterday, which I love that book. It's so sad, but and when we finished the chapter, I mean, we're not even close to the end of the book. We're on chapter like 3, and he looks over at me. He's like, "Mom, are you crying?" I'm like, "No, I am not crying." And he's like, "Yes, you are totally crying. You always cry with these books, Mom." I'm like,
No,
"Oh," but it was just so sweet, because the boy, I would cry just talking about him. He, saved up for 2 years, catching fish and selling vegetables and picking blackberries till his hands were all cut up and he had no shoes. His parents could afford him shoes. So he's out in the blackberry bushes with his feet all cut up from the thorns to save money to buy these dogs. And like when he finally goes in and his grandfather says he's going to get the dogs for him, I just started crying. But my son was like,
I do
yeah,
the
my
same
son was
thing.
like, wow, he worked for 2 years. He did all that stuff. And I was like, yeah, is there anything you would work that hard for? And he's like, I don't know. He's like, that that's amazing. Like that takes a lot of perseverance to like work that hard. Man, I really probably need to work on that. That was not me. That was not me trying
Yes.
to figure out, okay, well, we need to work on saving money. So I'm going to read, da, 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 like,
Right. Right. And if you had said that, then it
yeah,
would not have the
nope,
same impact as him getting it for himself. I mean, and there are times obviously that we address
yes,
our
yeah,
children
no,
and we address their behavior. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about feeding their spirit, like the soul, which is really the section we're in right now. It's like, what may education do for the soul of a
yes.
child is the question she asks. What can it do for their souls? And this is what it can do. And she
Mm,
says, how is the soul of a man to be satisfied? And if you skip on down here, it says, he has an urgent, incessant, irrepressible need of the infinite. I want, am made for, and must have a God, not a mere serviceable religion, because we have in us an infinite capacity for love, loyalty, and service, which we cannot expend upon any other. And if you would said to him, okay, I'm going to
so
read you this
beautiful.
story, and when we read this story, we're going to do a worksheet that says, okay, what would you work for, and what would you do, and what blah 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 blah. Then he's not going to take that
Yeah.
away from it. But because he was able to chew on it himself and connect with it himself, he'll take those ideas later on and connect them to something else. And that's how we educate the soul
I
of a
think it's how
man,
we,
just
and
like
it's
that.
not just children, right? It's us too. I mean, think about it. Like, what have been the deepest lessons in your life? Well, the things I've learned for myself. And not someone
Yes.
like, Julie, we need to have a little intervention. I noticed you've been blah, 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 blah. Let me tell you what you need to do with your life, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, forget you, right?
Yes.
If it's
Right.
me coming up with the
Right.
idea and me being convicted about it and me getting an understanding, then it's so much more meaningful to us. And she says in here, we need to go to the source. Um, and she says, this kid says, the Bible is the most interesting book I know, says a young person of 10 who has read a good many books. um, and the
Yes.
importance of, reading scripture, not necessarily reading a paraphrased or children's version or, you know, us reading it and then pre-digesting it and telling them what was important. And
Yes.
in
This
younger years,
good
I can see
learn.
it's challenging. There's definitely, and there's parts that she avoids in her programs of the Bible, especially the Old Testament at first, but that, they're being in touch with the living word, like what will actually change them. Yeah. But it's not a huge
And we
system and we got to have these Bible reading planned and we're going to memorize all these things and we're going to get stickers and we're going to do all, like, it's just the Bible. We're just going to read that. And we have to make
and we
connections and
get a lot of
incorporate
questions
it in all
about that.
areas of the curriculum. And if we don't do that, then they're not going to get
And
it.
do an activity.
It's just simple,
Yeah.
which I appreciate so much.
Yes.
It's just, here it is, which is,
We get so many questions about that, Julie, about is it enough to read the scripture to my children? Is it enough just to, I feel like it's not enough, maybe they don't understand. And maybe you need to break it down
yeah,
into smaller pieces. Like, I understand, maybe you don't
right.
read
No,
a chapter, right? Maybe you just need to read a couple of verses. But what I have found, and with my older children, I really didn't know about that. I did read more devotionally sort of
yeah, and
things,
there's nothing wrong
and
with those,
they
but
were
yeah.
so bored with them. Yes, but they would get bored with
Mhm.
them so easily. So, I mean, they never held their interest. But when I read about Charlotte and I read about, okay, we need to do this, we need to, the difference in how they pay attention and what they can take from it, the narrations it's so different. So it really does work to just provide, and like you said, no effort for me. I don't have to pre-digest this. I just
I don't
read the
have to
scripture,
understand it because
let them
sometimes I
read
don't
it.
understand it.
Right. I mean, God's got something different from me from it. And I love in the mornings when we have Bible time and read our scripture and say, okay, what do you take
Mhm.
away from that? It's rarely something that I would have taken away from it. And so there's three of us around the table now, and what the three of us take is never the same. It's always something different we
Yes.
notice or we take away, or that it connects to. Well, that reminds me, that's just like the story I just read
Mm.
yesterday. And it's the same sort of story. I wonder if this happened a couple of weeks ago. I wonder if the guy that wrote this book knew
Yeah.
about this. My fifth grader asked, "Didn't you knew this Bible story?" I'm like, I don't know. That's a really good question.
Yeah,
Similar.
yeah.
So
Well, I think this, Charlotte Mason started off with these first two principles for a reason, right? That children are born persons and they have this capacity
mm,
for good and evil. That um, we can get so focused on what math curriculum should I pick, and is my child learning how to read quick enough, and how do I teach nature study and all these little hows, right? And we miss the important things. So Charlotte Mason starts off with the most important thing, that this is a soul, right? And that our job is to help direct their affections to prepare this feast. And that we have to keep the
yes,
whole child constantly in our forefront as we're educating them. And it can get very easy to get bogged down, especially like this time of year in February, with all the little things that
yes.
aren't going well and all the little stressors. And we've been way
We're
too long.
tired. We're tired.
What did you say?
I said we're
Yes.
tired. We're just
Yes.
so tired.
um, that we can lose sight of that. And so I think it's important. Just that's why we're doing this book club, and it's important to go through Charlotte Mason's principles on a regular basis and focus on, okay, well, what is the outcome here? Is that my child knows all these three R's and can check off all these little things in boxes? No, it's educating this soul and educating this person, and that's what's going to last. Really, they're going to forget a lot of the things, most
Mm-hmm.
of the things really that you're teaching them and working through. And it's the character and the ability to think for themselves and the ability to choose right action and the ability to have their soul be magnanimous that is going to change and shape the person that they later become. That's what's going to stay. So keep the focus on these is super important.
Right.
Well, thank you for taking the time to continue through this book club. And
It's so
yeah,
good.
I know it's so important. Like even I mean, you and I have been reading these multiple times. We've been talking about this forever. I'm still learning things every time I read this.
Hmm. Oh,
Yeah,
every time. Yes. Every time I learn something I
and
have forgotten.
encouraged
So
too.
yeah.
I get encouraged. Oh, okay. Well, I actually have slacked off in that area. We probably need to work on that. And
Uh,
I get reminded of things that I forget too. And so it's so important just to keep reading her words and keep being reminded of how of why you're doing what you're doing,
yes.
and not let yourself get distracted by the million other glittery things that are out there. So well, thank
Yep.
you, and we hope to see some of you in March, but if not, we will be back on our podcast in April. So adios amigos.
Bye
Bye.
bye.